focusing on disability, as I mentioned previously. And I know that in many organisations, many have kind of started the diversity journey looking at gender, and more recently ethnicity has become a focus. But I'm delighted to have some time today to really deep dive into the focus of disability. It's going to be a really conversational discussion, so please feel free to ask any questions that you have via the chat. Karen, my wonderful colleague from TTC, will be sending these over to myself and also to the panel. But I wanted to start by just framing the context around disability before opening up and asking my panelists to introduce themselves. So to frame the scale of the situation, it's important for us to understand that more than 4.7 million disabled people are in work and have an employment rate of 53% compared to 82% of non-disabled people. Disabled people are also almost twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people, and 3 times as likely to be economically inactive. So just by hearing those stats, we can see that actually we have a challenge where we're not benefiting from the wonderful diversity of thought and skills that many disabled people have within this country and indeed across the world, in making sure that workplaces are inclusive and that workplaces are supporting people with disabilities to achieve and thrive in the workplace. The disability employment gap is 29%. And this gap measures the difference between the employment rate of disabled people compared to that of non-disabled people. So you can see that we really do have a long way to go. So in our discussion today, I want to talk a bit about how we can make a positive impact to some of these numbers that I've shared, and how we can really drive and move the needle further forward as it relates to this topic. So let me welcome our panel who will be sharing our insights today. We'd like to welcome Rena, we'd like to welcome Alex, we'd like to welcome Kim, and we would also like to welcome Adam. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask each of our panelists to give us a quick 10-15 seconds just introducing themselves and talking about who they're here representing today before we'll go into a deeper discussion and really get things moving. So if I start with Rena, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rena. I work for AbilityNet as an accessibility consultant, and I have done for the last just over 3 years. I am autistic and dyslexic.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rena, and welcome. Alex, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, so my name is Alex Barker. I'm the disability consultant for AbilityNet, and I've worked for AbilityNet for 20 years. I've got a rare neurological condition where my face is paralysed and I don't have all my fingers or toes. And so I'm very keen to come here today and help people understand how technology can be a real game changer. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. If I go to Adam next.
Hi there, I'm Adam Tweed. I'm also at AbilityNet. I'm the innovation consultant there, but I also talk and have lived experience of mental health conditions and a background in psychology.
Thank you very much, Adam. And last but certainly not least, Kim.
Thank you, Edleen. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Whippy, the Inclusion and Enablement Services Lead at PwC. I think it's fair to say I'm still on a bit of a journey with my own personal relationship to disability, but I've experienced chronic anxiety for most of my life. And most of my experience in this space has been built up working as an I&D professional in the field of disability.
Great, thank you, Kim. So to get us kick-started, I'm conscious that we have a number of colleagues here from AbilityNet. And whilst I have the privilege of knowing who AbilityNet are, I wonder if it'd be helpful just to initially get started by hearing from the colleagues at AbilityNet what the type of work is that AbilityNet does. So if we can get started, and Alex, if you want to kickstart for us on that, that'd be really helpful.
Thanks. So AbilityNet is a national organisation that helps both older and disabled people to use technology more effectively. Everyone knows that technology is all around us, but there's lots of people that find it really, really difficult to use technology because of disability, because of maybe exclusion, or just maybe because no one's actually ever sat down with them to show them technology. And ironically, I'm talking to you from a job centre today where we're doing some work to help get people who are digitally excluded to take advantage of the wonderful opportunities that technology has got. Because if you don't know how to use technology, you're really at a disadvantage.
Thank you. And kind of building on that topic of the support that AbilityNet provides, I'm conscious that when we think about disability in the workplace and some of the challenges that many organisations have, they sometimes don't really know where to start with this topic because people are not familiar with the appropriate language to be using or aren't sure about the right or wrong things to be saying. So, Adam, I wondered if I could bring you in there just to talk about the importance of language and some of the do's and don'ts in this space, just so that we can better understand how to get kick-started.
I think it's a difficult one because language always is one of these constantly evolving processes, and what we might say one day is kind of taboo the next, probably not quite that quickly. And certainly as a charity, we are very much not of the opinion of thou shalt not. So it is about just recognizing that things do change, people do change. And kind of the terms that people will prefer to be used about them will also vary from person to person. So it's very much an individual experience and a kind of an individual preference. I know Rena has also talked a little bit in the sessions that we do about her. I mean, Alex as well can come in at the end. It's just something in particular I'm particularly keen for Rena to also mention, because she's spoken about the terms around neurodivergence, neurodiversity, and that sort of thing. And I know she doesn't necessarily identify directly, but rather with other people. So, Rena, did you want to?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of difficulty, I think, with people knowing how to refer to different kind of conditions, particularly in the kind of neurodiversity space, because there's so many different conditions and different ways to talk about them. A lot of different people thinking about autism, a lot of kind of medical professionals like to use person first language, so that's kind of person with autism. But I know that a lot of the autistic community, I saw a poll on Reddit a few months ago, don't actually like that because it sounds like they're walking around with autism in a bag. But actually there's no one term that everyone in the community likes, and I think that's the same for every disability. Everyone has their own views, and I think the most important part is to ask people what they would prefer. And I think that's one of the most important points around kind of referring to people is, you know, just like pronouns and things like that, just ask people what they would prefer you to use. But I mean, I can go on forever for language, but I'll stop there.
It was just, sorry, the reason that I brought that up just a moment ago was I know in the sessions you've talked about that it's not, you're not neurodivergent, it's you talk about and refer to everybody else as neurotypical. So yeah, because in my head I'm the normal one and everyone else is weird, because I've always experienced the world that I experience, and that doesn't make any difference to me. And so me and my family kind of talk about neurotypicals, which is basically anyone who doesn't have one of these neurodiverse labels. But yeah, I kind of think of myself as normal and everyone else as the strange ones, you know, with the jelly balls in the head and eye contact. But yeah.
And that makes complete sense, Rena. And actually, if we think about this within an organisational context, there's sometimes the mistake that organisations can make where a kind of one-size-fits-all approach seems to be the mechanism or the approach taken. So I wondered if we could bring in Kim there just to understand a bit about your experience being in an organisation, but also your own kind of shared experience just based on the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, certainly. I think it was, I mean, the topic of language fascinates me on a personal level, because I think one of the things that in starting to look at how disability fits in from the inclusion lens, we started to appreciate that for a lot of non-disabled people, they actually don't really have that much to get going on in terms of what that actually means. So there was a whole piece that we started to do, and indeed are still on the journey of just some kind of support and tools and basic awareness around actually what does this term mean? What is the experience of disabled people? Letting people know that it's okay to use the word disability was such a big thing for us internally, because we still get questions about that. But we made sure that we're lucky to have a disability network, and they have a kind of a neurodiversity community within that. So where we're looking at the guidance and tools, going and asking people, does this resonate? What's your experience? What would you like people to know, so that we can try and amplify some of their voices? But I think one thing, I mean, if I do have a tip, I think I completely agree and resonate with everything that Adam and Rena said about it's absolutely personal preference and everybody is an individual. People seem to value having a bit of a safety net. So I would absolutely say to people, if you can get together some basic pointers and just some reassurance around it's okay to get it wrong, but here is some of the principles. There's loads of free resources out there. I do go to AbilityNet myself to kind of look at your webinars and fact sheets. So I think kind of start approaching the topic, let people know it's okay, but think about how you support them along that journey and engage with your disabled employees.
That's really helpful. And so we talked there about language and the fact that for some organisations that can be quite a big barrier to moving further forward as it relates to this journey. I just would love to hear from each of the panelists what some of the other common organisational challenges and barriers are faced by disabled people at work, based on the work that each of you is doing. And again, really happy. Let's kickstart with Alex.
I think one of the challenges is if you work in a diverse team, you don't want to stick out as the guy that's got as a disabled person, because when I've worked in organisations, I've worked because I've got a really good skill set. I haven't worked there just because I've got a disability. Let me give you an example. I don't know if you still do it, but when I used to work in an office, everyone used to make tea and coffee for everybody else. There was a communal tea and coffee making. And because of my hands, I found it really, really hard to carry cups of coffee. Now, I didn't want to be seen as, oh, Alex, he's disabled, he doesn't make the tea and coffee. I wanted to come up with a solution, so I bought myself a plastic box where I could put 4 cups of coffee or tea, so I could make coffee and tea for my team, because I didn't want to be seen as the odd one out. And I think sometimes it's about what you think that people in your team actually think about you, and sometimes that's not the case, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And again, I'd like to go to Kim to just get your thoughts on some of the challenges and barriers that you're seeing and hearing within your organisation beyond language.
Yeah, so we actually have been doing some in-depth exploration of this, because we knew, right, that looking at the number of people telling us they had a disability, that was way too low and that couldn't be realistic, but we didn't have the sort of tangible understanding of what the barriers were. So we did do some research about a year ago now, and kind of, survey and listening groups of people, and we found that the biggest barriers for us at the moment were awareness, which I think we've kind of touched on a bit around the language piece, but awareness of real lived impacts, not just awareness that disability exists. Adjustments, particularly looking at the soft adjustments piece, and how people can work in a way that meets their needs, as well as having the tools and equipment that meets their needs. And then there was this huge piece around open culture and progression, so being able to discuss not just the barriers that you personally may face, but how you play to your strengths and how you're supported to grow in the way and what that looks like for you. So it's all quite live for us at the moment in terms of seeing what interventions are going to help, but it's been a really interesting kind of look into, okay, how do we actually understand what's going on for us? And again, massive shout out to our Disability Network for coming along with us on that journey and continuing to.
Yeah, and Kim, you raised some important points there, and Alex did also in kind of what he said previously, and you talked about the importance of listening to colleagues and the importance of understanding what it is different individuals might need. And indeed, Alex, you talked about actually wanting to adapt and fit in. But if you're a manager or you're an organisation who hasn't started on this journey and you don't know how best to begin listening, or you don't know how best to ask colleagues what support they might need, or indeed whether you'll then be able to deliver on that support, how can you kind of get that that journey kick-started? And I'm really keen to go to you, Rena, because you shared the fact that actually you have and do view the world in one way, and you view everybody else as a slightly different, living in a slightly different way than what you do. So I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on actually approach to what I've just said. What's the best way to ask those questions or encourage people to disclose and move further forward?
I think there's an element of listening. So talking to people, but not just talking to people, listening to what they're saying and understanding that everyone works in a different way. I think while there is huge value in people disclosing, I think there's massive things that we can do to make the culture more open without necessarily needing everyone to disclose. And I think if we make that culture a more open culture, somewhere where people feel like they can share their experiences, their difficulties, or anything that they're struggling with, I think that in itself will encourage more people to disclose, because they'll feel like they'll still be accepted after disclosing. I know I've got one friend, I mean, I'm very open about disclosing. I'm not going to work for an organization who decides not to employ me because I'm autistic, because I'm amazing. And you know, being really, you know, humble about it. But I've got one friend who's decided not to disclose her dyslexia because she doesn't want to be treated any differently. And I think if we can create a culture, ideally in every organization, where nobody feels like that, I think that would be great. So I think listening to what people are saying, just generally, rather than just people with disabilities.
And building on what you just said there, Rena, you know, we know that best practice is creating an environment where people can make requests for adjustments if they want them, and people don't feel as though they have to disclose, or people can choose to disclose, and there's that personal choice or personal element around that. But what else do you think can be done to make sure that people feel comfortable to be themselves and to have that kind of confidence that you talked about, right, where you recognize that actually you are amazing and you have lots of skills and lots of talent, and lots of important things that you bring to a workplace or an organization? What else can be done on a day-to-day basis to really shift so that people can feel comfortable and feel confident bringing their full selves to work?
I think flexibility is a big part of it. I think you know, when someone says something, be flexible. Don't just, you know, if they're asking for some sort of adjustment or something like that, don't just knock them down and say, oh no, we can't do that. You know, start at the point where, okay, that's what you think we need. Let's have a look at what we can do to accommodate that. And if we can't accommodate that, let's come up with an alternative solution. And I think it's very much about having that mindset of flexibility and understanding. And I think that's where a lot of it starts.
I'd really like to bring in Adam and then Alex to this discussion. So Adam, I don't know if you want to come in next. Oh, you're on mute.
Classic.
We've always got to have that once in the pool.
Had to be me, didn't it? Yeah, I was just going to say, it's, for me, it's about, again, not as Rena, just kind of going on from what Rena was saying, though, it's not about disability, it's about barriers. And if you can get a workforce that's focused on individual barriers as opposed to disabilities, then you have a kind of environment where people can say, I'm having a problem doing this, without having to say I'm having a problem doing this because I'm dyslexic. It means that you have a workforce that's going to be much more comfortable working in a way that suits them. You don't have this kind of culture of them and us, you know, that you've got a disability, you're well lucky, you've got, you know, much lower targets and all that kind of the adjustments frame of mind. But you have an inclusive workspace where people experience difficulties, as we all do, and have adjustments made accordingly, or have technology available accordingly that just suits their way of working.
And Alex, love to bring you in here.
So I was just going to make the point that I think sometimes when people are looking to get a job with particular companies and they don't want to disclose their disability, now that's up to them. But when they get into their job, maybe 6 months down the line, and they start to struggle, and then they have to disclose that they've got dyslexia, or they're on the autistic spectrum, I always think that causes difficulties because managers want to think that they've got a really good open relationship. And if that's not established right at the start, I always think that might cause problems in the relationship further down the line.
Yeah, and Kim, I'd like to bring you in here because you talked about kind of the impact that your employee network are having and some of the work that you've started to do in this space as an organisation. So yeah, keen to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the thing about barriers is so key. And when I think about, how you get started on this, for me, it's an organizational level and an individual level, because I think there's things we can all be doing as individuals as well. At an organizational level, I think look at the behaviors and the culture at that sort of level around kind of how, for us, we want to create a place where people can be open if they want to, because for a lot of people, this is a big part of their identity and we wouldn't want them to have to hide that. But we shouldn't be requiring that. And to ask for support, you shouldn't need to have to qualify that with, proof or evidence or anything like that. So it's about actually honing in on what do you need, what kind of functionality, what kind of challenges might you be facing in your role, and that's kind of the process that our adjustments team would look at. But on an individual level, kind of colleague to colleague or manager to colleague, I think just asking the simple question, what can I do to help you succeed, and kind of even for some of our people putting that positive spin on it rather than what you're struggling with at the moment, which can be helpful. But I think looking at actually what are your success criteria and how do we play to those has been something that I think even just having questions like that ready that you can ask, because I think starting the conversation, even if you don't know where it's going to go, is the best thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key and critical what you talked about there, being able to frame the conversation in a positive way, which to Alex's point builds up that relationship of trust and you feel more comfortable having a conversation that might not initially be really comfortable. But it'd be really helpful to particularly hear from our AbilityNet colleagues what the kind of typical journey is that companies go on in order to try and be more accessible when somebody has come forward and has said, right, I might need this adjustment or I might need this piece of technology or support to enhance my working capabilities. It'd be really great to kind of hear what that journey looks like. Adam, I don't know if you want to get us kick-started.
I can do. I'm just conscious Alex and Brina have got their hands up with the other things that you wanted to add.
No,
Alex was from before.
From before. And
hang on, I'll turn my hand down.
Mine kind of relates to both points, what we were talking about before and what we're talking about here. And it's kind of around knowing that the person knows themselves best. So listen to what they're saying. So, I mean, I had one instance in a previous work experience role where I went in one day and my kind of mentor was going into like a 3-hour meeting and he gave me something to do. And I said, is there anything else that you want me to do if I finish that? And we went round this circle like 3 or 4 times and I just went, yeah, but he said, you won't finish it. And I went, yeah, but if I do finish it, what do you want me to do? He goes, yeah, but you won't finish it. And we went down that circle 3 or 4 times. And in the end, I just gave up. I'm like, okay, fine. And then about halfway through his meeting, I was in the office and I just said to the other guys in the office, right, I've done that. What should I do next? And the entire office erupted into laughter. And it's about listening. Like, this person knows themselves best. And there's no harm in talking to them, listening to them, talking about what they think they need, or even what they're finding difficult and working with that. And I think that's a really important part of the journey to make kind of workplaces more inclusive, is to just listen to people about what they think they need, but not everyone will know that. So what they're struggling with, and talking about ways you can get around that. And I think that bit's really important. I think that's one of the first steps you can take.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's about kind of asking the questions, listening, following through, and then actually having those regular checkpoints where, the support needed might adjust, the change needed might be different, and it's going to be different for each and every individual. And to your point, Rena, individuals know themselves best. So in that instance that you gave, knew that you were going to finish within the time frame. and the person couldn't believe that that was going to happen, and so actually missed an opportunity for you to do extra work for that hour and a half that they could have been capitalizing on.
Exactly.
And then actually, that's not what we want in organisations. So yeah, Alex, I'd love to bring you in because I think you just popped your hand back up.
Sure. I'd also say that I think it's really, really important not to make assumptions. So you might think because I've got misshapen fingers, I can't use a standard keyboard. I can, because I've used a standard keyboard most of my life. So it's no good a manager thinking, right, this guy's only got one arm, so we need to get all this technology in place. Oh, what do you mean you can use a standard keyboard? But we've got all this nice equipment over there. And it's like, just ask and don't make assumptions.
I think that's true from my perspective as well. So, you know, I've recently, I have a history, as I say, of managing poor mental health at times, and anxiety being one that's come up fairly recently. But it's one of those that I find I need to manage it myself. I don't need somebody managing it for me. So something like a speaking event is going to be something that will cause me anxiety, but that doesn't mean to say I don't want to do it. So to hear, you know, why aren't I going to that event, and to hear somebody say, well, it's because we know you're anxious, we wouldn't want to give that to you, it disempowers you. You know, it makes you about the condition, not about yourself managing the condition. So yeah. And you were mentioning, I'm sorry, I kind of derailed that. You were asking me a minute ago about the journey and the adjustments, and I think for us as a charity, I mean, we have a gap analysis program that does it goes through the entire employee journey. So from recruitment all the way through, you know, onboarding and ways of working and that sort of thing. And we view it as very much a journey, and a journey of stages at each one of those stages. So we use the acorn to oak analogy because we didn't want the kind of bronze, silver and gold standards, because that seems to frame it more as a, you know, we've got this now, so that's it, that's done. Accessibility, inclusivity, it is a journey. Things change. You're going to be at it at different stages, and when you reach those stages, that's not right. Fantastic, right? What do we tackle next? It's an ongoing thing. So, yeah, listening to people, that's your start off point. I think there's a question about recruiter for a graduate program, additional advice on adjustments to help through the recruitment process. So again, that just kind of ties in. I've noticed as it popped up, but yeah, it's about listening to the people you're going out to, making sure that you're connecting with people, finding out where the barriers are. It's not about, you know, you want to make sure at a recruitment level that you're advertising in the right places, that your job adverts are getting seen by the right people. And if those people aren't applying for the jobs, that you're then going out and finding out why, what barriers are stopping them. You know, it's those sorts of conversations to have with the people it affects.
And Adam, just to build on that, so again, kind of bringing in the question we've had from the audience around the recruitment perspective and moving to talk about some of our people processes. If you're an individual or a candidate who has applied and you have a disability, but to the point that Alex made, you're nervous about sharing that because you think, well, maybe this employer won't take me forward to the next step of the process, or they won't hire me. How can you as a recruiter learn to have that conversation in a really open, honest, empathetic way, where you're really clear that actually you're asking what the adjustments are that might be needed because you want to help that candidate to be as successful as possible, without kind of putting them off at applying or putting them off kind of moving forward in the recruitment process?
I think my opinion on it is that you would make that as transparent as possible in terms of the way that you're putting forward the job application process. So rather than saying, if you have a disability, please tick here and get in touch, and we'll make sure that you're listened to, and we might find some special adjustments for you. You just say, on the day we will be using Teams, there will be captions available. You know, you champion all the good work that you're doing, because that encourages people to say, well, I've noticed that you're doing all this, and clearly you're thinking about disability, or you're thinking about the barriers that might face me, but here's one that you haven't thought of that will impact me. Is there any conversation that we can have? It's about creating a sense of kind of belonging around that, a safe space that says, yes, we've thought about it. We might not have ticked all the boxes, but we have thought about it. We're a company that this matters to, so please talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rena, I want to bring you in there because I could see your hand was up.
Yeah, so it's kind of going along what Adam just said, is kind of outlining the adjustments that you're making by standard, if you like, that you know, we're doing it on this platform and there's going to be captions, you know, or those sorts of things. And then at the end of that, I think it would be really good to add in, you know, if you need any other adjustments, or if you feel like there's something else we could do to help you in this process, you know, please tick here, or please write them in this box, or something along those lines, and just making it really, really obvious that you're open to questions. Because myself, if I went into something like that and there were a bunch that listed and it didn't say that, I just go, oh right, okay, well they've already thought of this and they're making these adjustments, so I can't ask for anything else. Which is probably some of my literalism coming in, but yeah, just making it really, really obvious that, okay, you've done all this work and you're willing to make all of these adjustments, you made them by standard, but you are also willing to do other things as well.
Yeah.
Feedback and acting feedback. Sorry.
Agreed. And I think just to add to that, it's also being really mindful of what your response is once somebody has requested or asked for an adjustment. So again, to give a bit of personal lived experience, I asked for an adjustment as part of a recruitment process. And whilst I know the person was intending to be really helpful in their response, the response was then sort of, yes, we're happy to do that, but only if you're sure that you're actually able to do the interview. And I remember thinking, well, if I wasn't able to do the interview, I wouldn't have asked for that adjustment. And actually that in and of itself made me feel like, well, actually, this probably isn't where I want to be, because I've asked for something. You kind of attempted to listen, but then in doing so, I've kind of downplayed my ability, and that's probably not where I want to be. So just being really mindful of the language and the approach that you're taking, I think, is also really critical and key. Kim, I want to bring you in because I see you've popped your hand up as well.
Thanks, Adeline. I think if I can offer a kind of a sort of really practical thing, is ask everybody. And you've probably, like, we're a big organization, so we have these like big processes, and it was, for us, it was looking at, okay, where in the process can we put this question that everyone will see it and know that this is an option and that it will be relatable to them. So we do mention disability, but we kind of, the question is framed in terms of, let us know if you need any adjustments or anything additional to come through the process. This might be in relation to disability, neurodiversity, long-term conditions. We give some examples so people understand where we're coming from. But asking everybody is key, I think. Don't just kind of identify a group of people that you think need to be asked and go for them. And then I think there's a huge piece about meeting people where they're at as an individual when you have that conversation, because there's that, can be that feeling around less security in the recruitment process. You're after a job at the end of the day, and for a lot of people, they may not be ready to be fully open at the start of that process, but they might be able to kind of be more comfortable as you move along. So continually keeping those lines of communication open, and recognizing that people are the experts in their own experience, but where they might be coming to the kind of world of work for the first time, we see this a lot with our kind of graduate and school leaver programs. They might not know what it's like to work in an organization, or what's possible, or, and therefore what to ask for. So proactively offering, as kind of Rena's talked about, what's possible. And then I think, yeah, I completely agree with the point around transparency. Thinking on my own personal experience, kind of going through a recruitment process with anxiety, not knowing what to expect when, and I worked myself up into a terrible tizzy waiting for emails and am I moving forward? So if you can give indications of what to expect, what the assessments involve, what timelines are like, if you know as an organization you take a longer time to recruit, I think putting people's minds at ease can be so beneficial.
That's really critical and really key. And that two-way communication, again, helps to begin to build that trust with an employer from day one. Alex, I noticed your hand's up.
So I just wanted to say that it's about, when I worked in organisations, I've been really lucky to have managers who I felt that I could go to with any problems. But I have heard of people going to a manager and saying that I need X, Y, and Z, and the manager's gone, oh, I don't know how we're going to do that, or oh, that's going to be a little harder work, isn't it? And I think sometimes it acts, your the response that you get as an employee is so important. If you've got a manager who says, yeah, we can certainly sort that out. I don't know how yet, but I'll go and make some phone calls, rather than going, oh, I don't know. That's going to be really, really difficult, I think. And it's just about, you spend 40 hours or 48 hours at your job. It's a really big part of your life. You've got to, and you've got to make sure that you've got clear lines of communication. And if managers want you to succeed, they've got to be really open and really understanding of your requirements. And sometimes I'm not always sure that's the case, unfortunately.
And that's a perfect segue, Alex, because it raises the question around actually who should be accountable for the support and making sure that there's enhanced knowledge in this space. We often talk about, middle managers being a frosty ceiling and often them not having the correct level of information or understanding to be supportive. So what are some of the tangible things that organisations can make sure that they're doing to really impact this and make sure that the type of conversation that you described, Alex, isn't the one that's being had, and it is a conversation that is more supportive, where action can be taken and things can be moved further forward? Rena, I don't know if you want to come in to start on that.
Yeah, I think part of the thing that we can do to help with this is, again, it's about openness in the organization. That middle manager might not have the authority to say yes or no, but having that openness in the organization for those managers to go to their managers or someone else in the organization to say, I've had this request, what can we do to support this and to implement this? And I think having that openness for everyone in the organization to talk about this sort of stuff will really help to implement some of the things that people are asking for. And it's not necessarily those managers saying, yes, I'll go sort it out. It's them saying, okay, great, so I'll go and talk about this and we'll see what we can do, and then I'll come back to you and we can have another chat about what we can do, where we can go, what we can do to change the situation, help you get over these barriers that you're experiencing, but without necessarily promising that we'll do everything that everyone ever asks for, because that's not realistic.
Yeah. And so recognizing that, we're clearly saying that managers have a key role that actually may face some limitations, but need to be open and transparent in their communication and look at how they can seek additional support and seek additional information or sign off depending on what it is that might be needed. But there's a group that actually often provides support within organisations, depending on the size of the organisation, that we've not talked about. And Kim mentioned it earlier, it's the employee resource groups or the support groups. And so I'd just be keen to see and hear from colleagues, where you've seen employee resource groups adding additional support or adding advice and where things have worked well. And Kim, it makes sense to kind of bring you in first on this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, certainly. So for our Disability Awareness Network, Dawn, I think where we really see them kind of fitting into the puzzle, as it were, is around the peer support and community they create. So for a lot of people wanting someone to talk to, they're finding it really beneficial to go to someone who may have had a similar experience to them, or can actually really sort of kind of like, again, meet people where they're at in terms of that empathy and an understanding of what that journey might be like. And they've been really helpful in working with us to make sure people are signposted back out to support. I think people need somewhere to go, whether that's a manager needing somewhere they can go for advice, or an employee needing somewhere where they can go to be heard and to find where the support is. So it's just kind of helping us close up some of those comms gaps, and it will vary, absolutely. I appreciate some organizations might be quite small, some might be huge. For us, things can be complex because we're a really big organization, so you need to know where to go. But even in a small organization, just having spaces where people know the purpose of that space is to connect and share with others, I think can be really valuable for confidence, for getting the support you need.
And in addition to the work of the employee resource groups, how can we make sure that we have a more informed workforce? Should there be basic training that organisations are rolling out? Should there be an encouragement of storytelling, events, celebration days? You know, what works to really build not just the knowledge, but that allyship as well?
I'd like
really
to
keen to
come in on that quickly if I
go
can,
for it.
before I hand over to others.
Just
because I think I wanted to add actually to my previous point that the networks, we shouldn't put all the work of improving inclusion onto them. For a lot of organisations, they're voluntary roles, and ultimately there is a big kind of responsibility, I think, on the kind of HR and inclusion team type roles, or, you know, office managers in small organisations to kind of be looking at how kind of inclusivity is embedded. And I think story sharing has been so valuable for us in terms of creating more openness and then helping people feel like it's safe. But we recognize that there can be the context around that it isn't always fair to people for them to feel they have to put themselves out there and do that kind of emotional labor. So I think kind of being really balanced and understanding why you're doing that and how that's going to help move you forward, I think is really key. But yeah, absolutely, on training and resources, that's a big piece we're looking at. I think that really helps a lot of people just know where to go.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And just because I'm conscious of time, I'm going to shift topic ever so slightly, because I just want to talk about making sure that when we're looking at people processes within organisation, we're also encouraging and supporting fair and equal access to progression. And so we'll just be keen to hear from colleagues any kind of practical tips on things that you've seen work well to ensure that there is that fair and equal access to progression for disabled colleagues as well. So Rena, you've got your hand up, so I'll kickstart with you if that's okay.
Yeah, so one thing that we have in the accessibility consultant team at AbilityNet is something called the skills matrix, and it outlines what you have to do at what stage and how much of it to move towards progression. And for me, that made an absolutely massive difference. You know, I came in as a junior consultant, and in 3 years I've moved from junior to a team lead, and that clear progression outline and how to do it made all of the difference. I knew exactly where I needed to go, what I needed to do, how I needed to do it, and I think that's really important to have that transparency and that openness to help people understand where they need to go next.
No, that's really important. It kind of ensures that people know what they're working towards and how they need to deliver on something, which is key and critical. Alex, I'd like to bring you in.
Sure. I think one of the things that I would say is that you've got to have open and constructive dialogue with your manager to see what you could be doing to getting to you know, a stage where you're progressing through the organization. And I think one of the difficulties is that it's not so bad in big organizations, but in small organizations, sometimes there's nowhere for you to go. And I think people have got to be honest with each other, but they can say, okay, so there's nowhere you can go in this department, but there might be other openings, and if you can see that you're doing well, we might be able to find you an opening in the department, in another department. Otherwise, what happens is someone says, well, I've been doing this job for 10 years in a small department. I'd like to go higher, but there's nowhere I can go. And I think it's quite demoralizing if you're in that situation, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's organisations not just providing kind of clear routes and paths upwards, but recognizing that for some people that path in their career might be sideways, might be wider, might be into different teams, and being open about that.
And it's also saying, okay, well, I'm really sorry you didn't get that job, but you did really well in the interview. Why don't I give you some coaching so next time a job comes up, you know, you've got a slightly better skill set, because it costs nothing, and it makes someone feel, okay, my manager has got faith in me. They just want me to do things a little bit better, and I think that's a really, really good conversation to have.
Yeah,
in terms
so
of coaching.
making sure there's that open and honest feedback, even if a process hasn't gone well,
Yeah.
and providing support mechanisms so that people get any support that they might need to enhance their skills to be ready for that next level. No, that's really key. That's really critical. And Adam, I want to bring you in because I noticed your hands up as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a little bit chicken and egg, but we do need disabled people in senior roles. It's not enough to hit your disabled quota and then look around and see that they're all, you know, at the kind of lower end of the pyramid, or the lower level of the pyramid, if you like. So you need to identify whether there are barriers, not only for disabled people getting into your organization, but whether there are barriers for those people to progress. And once those people are progressing in the organization, you get those key figures with lived experience of disability acting as a kind of a signpost to say, yeah, everybody's welcome here and you will be promoted. There is nothing in your way. You can, I don't know, it's a horrible phrase, but all I can think of at the moment is be like me. You know, you can identify yourself in a senior role and that person has a lived experience of a disability. So it's open and available to everybody.
Yes, so there you're really kind of honing in on the importance of representation, not just in junior roles, but right through that entire organisational pyramid. And talking about representation, we know that some organisations have representation targets in place for colleagues across kind of various diversity characteristics. Do we think that these are important and powerful? And actually, who should be accountable for reaching or meeting those diversity representation metrics? And again, Kim, I'll kickstart with you.
Yeah, I do think it's really important for accountability and as a tangible way to measure progress. I'll put my hand on my heart and say that we haven't set disability targets yet, and that's through a lack of tangible data to form those targets on, which is why we're focused on improving our workforce data in order to get us to that point. But for the areas where we do set targets, which at the moment are gender and ethnicity, we make our business accountable. We sort of tie it to that kind of aspect of performance and delivery, and it goes right up to the partnership level in terms of we're holding you accountable. It's part of your roles to help us create an inclusive workforce. So the kind of accountability for targets sort of sits at that level with us.
Right, so that's sort of right at the top of the organisation, making sure that senior leaders understand the role and the responsibility that they have to make sure that their workforce is more diverse and is more representative of kind of the entirety of society by being kind of held to account, be that financially, be that in terms of the way in which they are commended or are kind of given credibility within the organisation, and making sure that that can be moved further forward. That's really, really important and really, really key. Just a kind of final shift in topic, because it would be remiss not to talk about it. Of course, we are now in a stage societally where we're all shifting out of the pandemic, so to speak. And that's not to say that, you know, the pandemic or COVID has gone away for many people. I know that actually they're still struggling with COVID, but of course, society has shifted. So we're not all in that deep lockdown that we were in back in 2020. And what that has meant for organisations is that there seems to have been a shift towards more flexible and hybrid working. And of course, for many people, this is something that has been welcomed, but I recognise that for some colleagues, actually, that can mean that if you're not being seen as much, you might be concerned that you're not being noticed as much in an organisation. And again, that can impact progression. So just want to hear from people any positive examples they've got of where flexible or hybrid working has worked, where organisations have put in more informed policies around those practices that has specifically helped disabled people so that they are able to kind of thrive in organisations just in the same way as they would have been doing pre-pandemic. So yeah, Rena, if I go to you first on that one.
Oh, massively. I mean, because of my autism, because of my my sensory difficulties, I can't work in an office. I was working from home pre-pandemic, but effectively, I think the pandemic has just forced so many companies to go, well, actually, we can work from home, and so many more organizations to accept that it is possible, and that if people can't work from an office, they can still be employed and work from home. And I think that's a massive thing. Like I couldn't work if I had to work from an office. I'd get far too stressed and anxious, and I just have a complete meltdown and give up. So I think it's really important to recognise that those organisations who have moved completely to home, I think they need to recognise that actually it worked during the pandemic. You know, they've not completely collapsed in the last 2-3 years. So why can't they employ people who can only work from home? I think that's a really important part of it. And I think that's just such a great realisation for people to have.
Yeah. And it sounds like, Rena, from your perspective, also to some degree creates more of a level playing field, because there's not this increased or significant pressure whereby you feel as though actually you're the only person who isn't in the office, because actually more people are working flexibly, more people are working hybrid. And so actually not being in the office maybe becomes slightly less of a barrier for some individuals. And I think that's really key and really important too. Alex, just to move to you.
Sure. So I used to work in an office 10 miles away from where I used to live. Because of my disability, my eyesight's not good enough to drive. So access to work would provide a taxi for me. But I still had to find £400 every week to pay for the taxi, which was quite difficult then. It'd be even more difficult now. But we at AbilityNet, we worked from home from 2020, and then when the pandemic wasn't as severe as it was, there was a debate about whether we ought to go into hybrid working. And I think what it's shown is, as long as you've got good contact with your colleagues, you can do really good work, whether you're working in the office and working at home. And the other thing that I would say is, a lot of my job is about doing presentations. You can't really do presentations in an office full of people where there's chatter going on and there's phone calls coming in. And I think organisations have got to think, okay, why don't we see how well these people can work from home? Because actually, as Rena says, sometimes people thrive at working at home, whereas if they had to work from the office, they'd have all this other baggage to contend with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair point. And you know, whilst I know there are still some organisations that have got sort of strict rules around, you have to be in the office on this number of days, or you have to be at home on this number of days, I think hopefully the tide is changing so that shift is moving, that people are recognising actually that people can do a good job irrespective of where they are, and can deliver kind of to the best of their ability, whether they're at home or in an office. And I think having that barrier, or you have to be in a certain number of days, can actually be off-putting for some disabled people if they feel as though, again, that becomes a barrier to access.
And you're right, and it's all about having a work-life balance. So you know, I've got a little dog, so at lunchtime we go for a walk around the park, and it's great because I feel a lot calmer than I would about sitting in an office for 8 hours. And I think getting a work-life balance right is essential, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to bring in Adam before I go to then my final question.
Yeah, I was just going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate there and say it is really about choice. I think one thing we need to bear in mind is that there are reasons why people might not want to be at home. We saw quite a significant spike in things like domestic violence, for example, when people couldn't leave. So that an office space can be a getaway for some people. It can be a safe haven. It can be the place that they go for, you know, safety. So yeah, I think hybrid working from home, the ability to work from home has been fantastic. We've shown it can be done. We've shown it's not a barrier to most employers, but I do think that we need to make sure that there is still a choice for people it still suits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the importance of choice and that employee empowerment is critical, because exactly as we've discussed with many of the things today, different people will have different situations, different circumstances, and organisations being flexible to enable people to be their best selves is actually how you're going to get the best out of people. So not putting kind of those restrictions and barriers either way, I think is really, really important. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to finish up with just one final question, which we're going to have to do in whistle stop time, but just one final piece of advice from each of you, if you were advising an organisation, whether large or small, on what they can do to drive forward the journey to make sure that organisations are more inclusive and more accessible for disabled people. And if everybody just kind of gives one final tidbit so that everybody takes away an idea, that'd be really helpful. So I will start with Alex, if that's all right.
Okay. I think my one idea is just be open to people's experiences and be open to new ways of working, because actually the people that have got lived experiences can think of things that you might never have considered.
Thank you. We'll go to Rena next.
I think mine's a bit more philosophical. Don't just hear people, actually listen to them. So yeah, have a conversation with someone, listen to what they're saying, think about it, take it on board, rather than just hearing them and dismissing it or kind of moving on. Actually listen to what people say.
That's really helpful. Kim?
I think whether you're starting out or whether you're on the journey, start asking in lots of environments, is this accessible? And it won't be yes or no, but it will start that exploration and conversation. If we can just keep asking that question, I think it gets people thinking about the right sort of things.
And Adam, finally.
I was just going to say, accept that you'll make mistakes. It's a journey. Just own the mistakes and accept that they'll be made.
No, that's really helpful. Look, a massive thank you to all of our panelists today. Just to quickly round up, we've covered so much ground and so many topics, but a few key takeaways and learnings from me. The importance of language in this space is key and critical, and whilst we recognise that it constantly evolves, actually we can help contribute to that evolution by asking, by listening, by taking the time to engage with resources so that we can better understand and learn. If we're looking at recruitment processes and how we bring individuals into the organisation, we can be proactive in our approach by making sure that we flag certain adjustments that might be available, making sure that we're advertising roles in places that everybody can see them, where people can feel as though they can come and be part of an organisation, and that we follow through with adjustments and support and having open dialogue throughout a process when people are moving into an organisation. Of course, doesn't stop there. Once people come through the door, we want to make sure that managers are supported to have conversations, teams are supported to have conversations, that people feel empowered to develop and build that trust over the course of their employee life cycle with an organisation. And part of that will mean engaging employee resource groups. Part of that will mean actually sometimes managers going away, needing to seek support. But part of that will be making sure there's accountability from the senior levels in organisation, including representation of disabled people right at the top of the organisation and filtering down through that pyramid. Additionally, we recognise the huge benefits that we've seen with organisations changing over time, and we've talked about the importance of hybrid working. We've talked about the importance of listening to colleagues and learning from that lived experience and making sure that we're implementing that for the day-to-day. But we've also talked about the critical element of making sure that we understand that there is no one size fits all. It's critical to listen to colleagues and hear what works best for them, and then support them in the most effective way to make sure that can be implemented, be that within an organisation or be that by reaching out to other experts and external support, organisations like AbilityNet or like TTC, who will have advice and resources that can really help you move further forward along the journey. So with that, I want to say a massive thank you again to all of our panellists. We've covered a lot of ground. I hope it's been useful, and I hope you've been able to really take something away from the sessions today that will help your organisation move further forward along this journey. And remember that it is a journey, as Adam has kindly told us. So be willing to make mistakes, but recognise that it's important to drive further forward, because we want to have organisations that really represent the broadest talent pools across society, and that absolutely includes disabled people too. So with that, a massive thank you and have a good rest of day.